Hello everyone, I'm your hostess with the mostest 8-second gaming, and in today's video we're going to be talking about and breaking down the weapon tier list for Split 2 of Season 15. Now this one did take us a little bit longer to get out because we were hoping that we were going to go back to Olympus and World's Edge would only be a temporary fix, but it looks like we're staying on World's Edge, so this is going to be for World's Edge. And if you guys are here and you're looking to finish off the Split strong in your rank climbs, then you need to check out the GameLeap website right now. Over there we have top level coaches who have hit the highest ranks possible. They've played with the best of the best, they've gained a lot of knowledge, and they're sharing that with you over on the site. There's hundreds of guides already with more coming every single week that are all site exclusive. You will not find them anywhere else. So click the link in the description, pick yourself up a membership, and start to improve today. But okay, jumping back into the tier list, there are two things that I want to cover very quickly. Number one, the weapon meta right now is very balanced. It's probably the most balanced we've seen in a very long time. So you're going to see a lot of weapons near the top because a lot of weapons are really good right now. There's only very slight differences making the weapons move up or down in the tiers. And number two, you will not see any care package weapons on this tier list. The care package weapons are in a tier of their own. They're all ridiculously good, so they're in a league of their own. You won't find them on this list. But now that we have that covered, let's talk about our D tier weapon, and the only one finding itself in here right now is the P2020. Now the P20 has always been a meme. Throughout the entirety of Apex, it's always just been a gun that you pick up off drop and then swap as soon as you can. When hammer points were in the game, it was actually pretty good and you could use it and be viable with it, but right now hammer points aren't there, and unless you have a really fast trigger finger, you are falling short on a lot of damage potential. This gun, it's going to continue to be a meme. Maybe hammer points make a return in the future, maybe not, who knows, but until then, D tier. Jumping into the C tier, we have the Triple Take, the Devotion, the Spitfire, and the R99. Now World's Edge is a very good map for marksman rifles especially, but the Triple Take right now just does not feel good. The charge up time's a little bit wonky, it just doesn't really have the oomph that it used to have, and right now it's just not a good gun. A lot of people say, oh, I use a Triple Take as a shotgun too. You shouldn't. Shotguns right now are in a very good state, and the Triple Take is not in a good state. It's not a really good gun in the meta right now, and that's why it's in C tier. Now next up we have another energy weapon, the Devotion. Now the Devotion does have a time and place to use, but you really need a turbocharger with it. And if you don't have the turbocharger, it really falls off in its usefulness. And on top of that, if you have a turbo, you should just be running a Havoc because of how good the Havoc is with the turbocharger. And if you don't have one, there's really no point in running the Devotion. You should just pick up a Volt instead because the Volt is good in the ranges that the Devotion's good, but it's more versatile and it's just a lot more deadly. The Devotion has really lost its place in the meta. It's not worth picking up, and that's why I have it in C tier. And speaking of not worth picking up, we have the Spitfire. Now LMGs have really just lost their spot in the meta. They used to be really strong. They used to be really oppressive. The Spitfire was good, the Devotion was good, the Rampage was good, everything was strong with the LMGs, but right now we've just kind of moved away from them. A lot of the fights are more up close and personal, and LMGs like the Spitfire just don't do well in those types of fights. If we see a meta shift more going back towards the mid-range fights, then the Spitfire might move up a little bit, but for right now it's staying in C tier. And the last gun in C tier is the R99. Now I know that I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but guys, the R99 has not been good for a long time. The math just isn't there for the gun. The one clip potential has fallen way down, and if you're going up against a red armor fortified legend, you're not one clipping them. It also falls off in medium ranges, and in close range it gets out DPS by the car and the prowler. The R99 has just fallen off the cliff. It's just not good anymore. I know some people really hold on to it for that nostalgia reason, or they're just really comfortable with it, and that's your own personal preference, but right now in terms of SMGs, the R99 is not good. But now let's move into our B tier weapons, and in the B tier we have the Hemlock, the L-Star, the Mastiff, and the Mozambique. Starting off with the Hemlock, this is the worst of the assault rifles right now. Like the Spitfire, the Hemlock just doesn't have a place in the meta. Right now the fights are not really medium to long range, it's a lot of get in your face. And the Hemlock with the triple round burst just doesn't really shine there. It doesn't have the good up close potential that the other assault rifles have. If you're landing all three bursts in those medium range fights, then yeah, the Hemlock can put in some work, but it's very stuck in its own one little niche, and if you're not in that, then the Hemlock really falls off and you're not going to be doing the damage that you need to be doing. And that's almost like our next gun, the L-Star. Now the L-Star does feel really good right now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I've been using it a lot and it does feel fun to use. But the issue with the L-Star is you cannot really use it in medium to long ranges like an LMG should. The way that you play an L-Star is kind of like an SMG, but right now SMGs are super strong and they outclass LMGs by a mile. And that's the issue with the L-Star right now. It does feel good, but it's just not good enough. It really does not have a place in the meta. Your stray speed gets all messed up. It's not worth running, and maybe again, if we see some more shifts towards the meta of being more long range to medium range and the L-Star can kind of take a spot in there, then we might see it move up, but right now it's B tier. And one of the most surprising guns in the B tier is the Mastiff. Now I don't know if they did a silent nerf to the Mastiff or what's going on with it, but right now it just doesn't does not feel as consistent as it used to be. It kind of feels a little bit off. If you're hitting those full body shots, then yes, it can be good, but you really do need a bolt with it and you really need to pace your shots. It is a very unforgiving shotgun right now, and honestly, I didn't think I'd ever say that about the Mastiff because I love the Mastiff and I always thought it was a more consistent shotgun, but right now it just doesn't feel that way. It hurts me to say this because the Mastiff is my baby. I much prefer the Mastiff over the PK or the Eva, but right now it's just not a good shotgun. But on the flip side of consistency, we have the Mozambique here. Now the Mozambique just shoots out 45 damage each time, but while it is consistent with those 45s, it just doesn't have the power that the other shotguns do. The Mozambique right now is more just a shotgun bolt holder until you find something like a PK or an Eva. Again, I do hope that the Mozambique does get hammer points back at some point because then it will move up in the tiers because of how good it actually can be, but for right now it just can't move any higher because it just doesn't have the damage potential that the other shotguns do. It just isn't as scary as the other ones. And that is why it's capping off our B tier, so let's move into the A tier now. There's a lot of guns here, so you ready for this? In the A tier, we have the 30-30, the Alternator, the G7 Scout, the Havoc, the Longbow, the PK, the Sentinel, and the Volt. Starting things off with the 30-30, I love the 30-30. I know a lot of people think it's a little bit weird to use, but right now it's in a very solid state, especially with the Skull Piercer and the built-in dual shell hop-up. Once you actually learn how to pace your shots with the 30-30 and actually get the timing down, you can be melting people in fights, especially from a long distance away. Now, I have mentioned that the fights are more up close and personal, but if you're actually a support player, you can be a little bit more of a distance away, and marksman rifles on World's Edge are top notch. World's Edge does have a lot of really weird sniper lanes where they're not long enough to really abuse sniper rifles, but they're just long enough to abuse marksman rifles. Marksman rifles are definitely key on World's Edge, and that's why I have the 30-30 in A tier. Now, next up we have the Alternator, and the Alternator is a very solid gun. It's very easy to control the recoil, it's very good in specific fights. The only issue with the Alternator is it doesn't have a lot of upfront DPS. So if you're in a fight with somebody and they're hitting shots and you're hitting shots, but they have something that's a little bit better, they're going to be outclassing you even if you're hitting every single shot because they're hitting the same amount of bullets. That is the only issue with the Alternator, but if you're able to target somebody when they're not targeting you, the Alternator can do some pretty good damage and actually win you some fights. This is a really solid gun for new players as well to kind of give them an introduction into Apex because it does have a ridiculously easy to control recoil pattern. I do like the Alternator, it does feel good to use, and that is why I have it in A tier. But the next weapon is the G7 Scout. Now the Scout is in the crafter right now, and usually weapons in the crafter are a lot less desirable and they do fall down in the meta. But again, like I said, marksman rifles really strong on World's Edge, the G7 Scout, really strong marksman rifle, and you can absolutely use and abuse it. It also has a really strong hip fire, one that you would not expect from a marksman rifle, so if you do get into an up close fight and you panic and have to pull that out, you can actually win some pretty good fights with it. It does also have the double tap hop up, but honestly, I don't recommend using the double tap. You can get a lot more consistent damage off with the single fire. The double tap can be just a little bit weird and really cause you to miss some shots that you shouldn't miss when you were on single fire. But that is a little bit of personal preference. If you like using the double tap, use it. It's not really going to hinder you. It's just something that I do recommend. Now, next up, we have the only assault rifle in the A tier, and that is the Havoc. Now, the Havoc is a very strong weapon. Don't get me wrong. It can absolutely shred people, especially if you are able to get those juicy one clips off. But the issue with the Havoc is it does rely on that turbocharger. If you don't have it, the recoil is a little bit harder to control and it does start to fall off in the medium to long range categories. When the turbocharger is in the crafter, I always pick up a Havoc and I just craft a turbocharger because of how strong the weapon is. But relying on a gold hop up when there are 3 in rotation can be a little bit of a downside. So that is why I have it in A tier and not S tier. Now, next up we have the Longbow, and the Longbow is just a very good generic sniper rifle. It has a very good fire rate, it has some pretty good headshot damage, especially if you hit the Skull Piercer on it, and it can do well. Now, I have it in A tier because it is a very solid, reliable sniper rifle, but sniper rifles aren't the best on World's Edge. You're more likely to be running a marksman rifle. But if you are able to post up in a position with somebody like a Caustic or something like along those lines and be more defensive and have a sniper rifle like the Longbow, you can easily farm up Evo armors, you can snipe some kills from people, and the sniper rifle isn't that bad. The only issue with them is they can fall off in the late game because once you're up close with somebody, then it's a little bit harder to use them. But that doesn't mean I can put it any lower, but I also can't put it any higher, so A tier it stays. And next up we have the Peacekeeper, and the Peacekeeper is a very good shotgun right now. We are still in what is kind of a shotgun meta. We are kind of bouncing back and forth between shotguns and SMGs, and the Peacekeeper is good, but the issue with the Peacekeeper is you have to be hitting every single shot with it, and you have to have a good bolt. If If you miss one shot with a Peacekeeper and the other person has an SMG like a Prowler or a car, they are just gonna absolutely dominate you. It is a very unforgiving gun. It is a very high risk, high reward, especially if you're using the choke on it. If you have a fully choked up Peacekeeper shot and you hit somebody all headshots, then you're doing a lot of damage and you're really setting yourself up for success in a fight. But if you miss that and they run at you with an SMG, you're probably dead. It's a solid gun, but it's not broken, so that's why I have it in A tier. Now the next weapon we have in here is the Sentinel, and the Sentinel is basically the same stuff as the longbow. It's a really good sniper rifle. It's very useful. When you charge it up with the shield cell, you can be doing a bunch of damage, but where the Sentinel falls off where the longbow doesn't is the Sentinel takes years to just rechamber another round and then shoot again, and by that time somebody can just move into a new position of cover. The Sentinel does not have the fire rate that it needs in order to be an absolute dominant machine in the meta. Honestly, I think the Sentinel's in a very good spot. It does have a very high damage output with lower fire rate. I think it's pretty balanced, but in a game where the smallest advantages matter, being balanced isn't the best thing. But it's a very solid A tier weapon. And rounding off the A tier, we have the Volt. Now the Volt is a strong SMG, but where the Volt really shined was those medium range engagements, because it was very versatile, it was very steady, and it was very good in those fights. But the fact that it's lost the barrel stabilizer has kind of made it a little bit harder to control the recoil, and it's kind of taken it out of that category just a little bit. Now in those types of fights, it's losing to assault rifles, and in the up close fights, it's losing to other SMGs. It's still a very solid, versatile gun, but it's not broken, and that is why I cannot put it any higher, but I can't put it any lower again, so it's A tier. But now let's move into our S tier, the really strong guns that you're going to be wanting to run this split and absolutely abusing. In here we have the Prowler, the R301, the Flatline, the Car, the Charge Rifle, the Eva, and the Wingman. But let's start things off with the Prowler, and the Prowler right before the split did get a buff of getting 1 damage per bullet. And a lot of people don't understand how absolutely ridiculous that can be, especially on a gun like the Prowler. You are now able to 2 burst most armors and 3 burst every armor. Even if it's a fortified legend, you are able to 3 burst them. The only issue that the Prowler has is that it is a 5-round burst weapon, and that can be a little bit weird to some people. They're not used to it. But as soon as you get used to it and you actually start to run the Prowler, you can be shredding people in up close fights. And I know some people aren't gonna like to hear this, but trust me, it is a thing. If you're a controller player, use this. It's ridiculously strong with aim assist and how consistent you can be in those fights. If you're a roller player, pick this up every single time and just crutch it, abuse it, use it when you can. You'll be winning a lot of fights with this and you'll be getting a ton of RP with it. But now let's move forward to the 2 assault rifles in the S tier, the R301 and the Flatline. And I'm going to be talking about these 2 together because they're essentially the same weapon. They shred in close and medium range fights, and if you are in a long range fight, they have the anvil receiver. You can flip it over to single fire and still be a productive member of your team while doing some poke damage. These 2 weapons have always been a staple in Apex. They've always been strong, and they're probably going to stay strong for the rest of Apex. They're just that good of a gun. If you wanted to run an assault rifle and you don't have a turbocharger, pick up one of these 2, you'll be fine. Now next up we have the Car, and the Car is another kind of one of those weird special cases because it is in the crafter, and when a gun is in the crafter, it does lose some desirability in the meta, but the Car has stayed just as strong as it was, and a lot of people are opting to land on crafters just to get this gun, especially right now because we're moving into the Bangalore meta. The Car is really strong in those up close fights when you're using the smoke as cover and you want to just rush somebody. You throw us on a Bloodhound, you let them play in the smoke, and they can just absolutely beam. And what's that about a beam? That's right, coming up next we have the Charge Rifle. Now I know that I said the marksman rifles are more desirable on World's Edge, but the Charge Rifle is just in a league of its own when it comes to snipers or marksman rifles. This is a hit scan beam that does a bunch of damage and has no bullet drop. The only thing that limits you with this weapon is your ability to track somebody. You don't have to factor in the bullet drop. You don't have to factor in anything. You just point, click, and do a bunch of damage. I know that a lot of people think that the Charge Rifle is annoying, and they think it's annoying for a very good reason, because it's very strong, it's very easy to use, and if you want to run sniper rifle, you should just be using this. I've always put the Charge Rifle in a very high spot because it's always just been a good weapon. There's a reason that they nerf it every single time they get a chance to. But before I go on a huge rant about the Charge Rifle, let's move into the Eva, the next weapon in the S tier. Now right now, the Eva is so dominant in fights because, like I said, broken record here, the fights are up close and personal. You want to be in somebody's face, and that's where the Eva shines. The The only issue with the EVA is when you start to get a little bit further away from people, it starts to have a little bit of damage drop off. But the fights are aggressive. They're run up and just beat in the person's face, and that's where the EVA wants to be, and it is absolutely nutty with a purple bolt and a purple stock and just how fast you can pull it out. If you want to run a shotgun and you want to be aggressive, the EVA is the go-to. Don't pick up the PK, don't pick up the Mastiff, pick up the EVA if you want to be aggressive. And the last weapon finding its spot in the S tier is the Wingman. Now, the Wingman's always been a solid gun in Apex. It's always been a staple weapon of a lot of players. And there's a very good reason. It's versatile and it's high risk, high reward. It's one of those guns where you have to be using it almost every single day to keep consistent with it, but once you are at that point, it can do wonders for you. If you're able to hit like a body shot, headshot, body shot, you are downing most players. It can pump out a stupid amount of damage in a very little amount of time. And again, it's very high risk, high reward, because if you're missing shots, somebody's just going to run at you and you're going to die. But it's one of the weapons that is just so good and so strong, it has to be an S tier, and you can use it with almost no attachments. It doesn't need a sight, it doesn't really need a mag, and it doesn't really need the skull piercer because it's still just good either way. But let me know your favorite weapon in the comments down below, and if you guys want to stay up to date with the latest and greatest Apex Legends tips, tricks, and news, don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button. Thank you guys all for watching. Once again, I'm 8 Second Gaming, and I will see you guys in the next one.